The jewelry boutique glittered in the midday sun, its glass doors polished to perfection, its displays glowing with diamonds and gold. Outside, the world hurried by, but inside, time seemed to move slower. Elegant customers browsing velvet-lined cases, clerks gliding gracefully in suits, the air heavy with the smell of perfume and wealth. Then, the door opened and the mood shifted. A tall black man stepped inside. He wore simple jeans, a plain shirt, and a light jacket. His shoes were scuffed, his hands empty. To the eye of any stranger, he looked like just another passerby who had wandered in, perhaps out of curiosity. The silence lasted only a second, but it was enough. Two clerks behind the counter exchanged a glance. Their smiles tightened, their posture stiffened. One leaned slightly toward the other, her lips curling into the faintest sneer. Near the door, the security guard, a tall white man with a square jaw, straightened and began moving deliberately in the man's direction. The black man paused by a glass case, where diamond rings sparkled beneath perfect lighting. He bent slightly, studying them, his face calm, unreadable. After a beat, he spoke quietly. "May I see that one, please?" He pointed at a platinum band set with a row of flawless stones. The clerk froze, then forced a laugh that dripped with disdain. "That one? Are you sure?" She turned, loud enough for others to hear. "Perhaps you'd prefer something from the front window. More affordable." Her colleague stifled a laugh. The guard stopped a few feet away, close enough that his shadow loomed over the man. A well-dressed white couple at the next case turned their heads. The woman smirked faintly, whispering to her companion. The man adjusted his cufflinks, giving the newcomer a long, appraising look, as though deciding what he was even doing there. The clerk leaned closer, her voice sweet but sharp. "You understand, sir? This is Maison Étoile. These pieces are not for, casual browsing." The man's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained controlled. He didn't flinch. He didn't fire back. He simply looked at her, his dark eyes steady, then glanced at the guard, who now hovered at his side like a warning. Inside him, something burned, but outwardly he remained calm, almost serene. The clerk added louder this time. "We don't like people wasting our time. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere else." A ripple of awkward silence passed through the boutique. The couple turned back to their shopping. Another customer pulled out a phone, recording discreetly. The black man stood still, the sting of humiliation hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, he seemed to inhale it all, the disdain, the suspicion, the arrogance, and swallow it down like poison. His lips pressed into a thin line. Then a voice rose, not in the room, but over the scene. A deep, steady narration. "They thought they knew me. They thought they understood who I was, what I was worth. But they had no idea. And in less than 24 hours, their world would collapse." The image froze, the sneer on the clerk's lips, the smirk on the couple's faces, the guard's looming presence. The screen darkened, leaving only the silhouette of the man reflected in the glass of the display case, framed by the sparkle of diamonds he wasn't allowed to touch. And then, cut. The sound of his footsteps echoed into the night, and the same man walking down a city street hours later, dressed in a flawless dark suit, the glow of skyscrapers behind him. The voice returned, lower, heavier. "To understand an empire, sometimes you must step inside it. As a stranger." The screen fades, leaving the promise of a reckoning still to come. The boutique's air was chilled, perfumed, and calculated to impress. The chandeliers above threw soft golden light onto velvet-lined displays, where diamonds glittered like frozen stars. Every detail was designed to whisper exclusivity. The man in the plainclothes stepped deeper inside, hands relaxed at his sides. He moved slowly, deliberately, as though he belonged there, though the staff clearly thought otherwise. Their eyes followed him, sharp and suspicious, their smiles polished for others, but clipped for him. A clerk approached a white couple near the center display, her voice dripping with charm. "This necklace is from our latest collection, custom set with emeralds from Colombia. You won't find anything like it anywhere else. She draped it across a velvet tray, smiling as the woman leaned in, her perfume filling the air. But when the man in jeans stopped at the same counter, the clerk's demeanor shifted instantly. Her warmth cooled. She pulled the tray slightly closer to herself, as if guarding it. Yes? She asked curtly. The man's tone was calm. I'd like to see that ring. She tilted her head, studying him with open skepticism. That piece starts at 25,000. The way she said it carried an unspoken message. Don't waste my time, he nodded. That's fine. Her lips twitched into a humorless smile. Are you sure? It's not the sort of item one usually browses. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low but sharp. Perhaps something more modest would be appropriate. Before he could respond, the security guard drew closer, his heavy shoes clicking on the marble floor. He positioned himself just behind the man, arms crossed, silent but imposing. Across the boutique, another clerk whispered to a colleague, not quietly enough. Some people just come in to look. They don't belong here. The words floated across the polished air like poison. The man in the jacket heard, but his expression didn't change. His gaze remained fixed on the diamonds. A young trainee clerk, barely out of her teens, hovered nearby. She looked uncomfortable, shifting on her feet. She glanced at the man, then at the senior clerk, as though torn between her duty and her conscience. The senior clerk's voice sharpened. Sir, perhaps you didn't hear me. This piece is very valuable. We only show it to serious buyers. The man finally looked at her, his expression calm, but his eyes intense. I asked to see it. The silence was heavy. Even the couple nearby paused their browsing, curiosity flickering in their eyes. The guard shifted again, closer. The senior clerk gave a sharp laugh, thin and cutting. Fine, she said with a theatrical sigh. She unlocked the case slowly, as if granting an undeserved favor. She lifted the tray and held it high, never placing it on the counter for him to touch. There, take a look. Beautiful, isn't it? But her voice carried condescension, as if mocking him for daring to ask. The man studied the ring in silence. For a moment, the entire boutique seemed to hold its breath. His dark eyes reflected the sparkle of the diamond, and yet his face betrayed nothing. Finally, he said quietly, Yes, beautiful. He let the silence stretch, then turned his gaze back to the clerk. May I try it on? Her laugh was louder this time, deliberate. She looked around the boutique, making sure others heard. Sir, this isn't a flea market. We don't let everyone handle merchandise at this level. The words dropped like stones. The white couple smirked, enjoying the spectacle. The guard's stance hardened, ready in case this customer made the wrong move. The young trainee clerk winced, whispering under her breath, That's not fair. But her voice was too soft, swallowed by the senior clerk's derision. The man remained still, his posture steady, his expression controlled. But inside, a storm brewed. He knew these looks. He knew these tones. He had endured them before, in restaurants, hotels, boardrooms dressed up as opportunities. He had swallowed the poison each time, turning it into fuel. And now, in a store that bore his own company's name, the poison was being poured again. But no one there knew. Not yet. The boutique's polished silence seemed to press tighter around him. Every sound, the tick of the wall clock, the clink of a bracelet, clasp at another counter, the soft whisper of silk from a customer's gown felt magnified. But under it all throbbed the tension of eyes, always on him, waiting for him to slip. The senior clerk lowered the tray back into the glass case with a deliberate snap, as though the mere act of showing it to him had been an indulgence. She turned her back without a word, moving quickly toward a white couple who had just entered. Welcome, she sang out, her voice suddenly syrup-sweet. You've come at the perfect time. We've just received an exclusive shipment. The contrast was brutal. Seconds ago, her words had been knives. Now they were velvet. The man in the plain clothes turned slowly, his gaze following her. The young trainee still hovered nearby, chewing her lip, as though wanting to speak but afraid of the consequences. The security guard had moved closer still. His shadow overlapped the man's shoulders, his stance wide, his expression cold. He spoke finally, his voice low, but sharp enough to slice. Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable near the front? The man glanced toward the entrance. That section of the boutique displayed smaller items: silver pendants, lower-end watches, charms meant for tourists. The implication was clear. I'm comfortable here, the man said evenly. The guard's eyes narrowed. These pieces are reserved for serious buyers. We don't allow loitering. The words echoed. Loitering. As if his presence here, standing in a space designed for beauty and wealth, was already a crime. A middle-aged woman at another counter turned slightly, her pearls catching the light. She looked him over quickly, jeans, jacket, dark skin, then turned away with a dismissive sniff. Her companion didn't bother to hide his stare, eyes narrowed in suspicion as though expecting him to reach into the case and run. The senior clerk reappeared at his side, her smile tight. Perhaps you should return when you've made an appointment. These items require discretion, proof of means. Her tone dripped with implication. The man met her gaze, his own steady. Are you asking to see my bank account? She blinked, momentarily thrown off, then recovered with a laugh. Of course not. But our clientele usually doesn't arrive in casual attire. Her eyes flicked deliberately over his jacket and scuffed shoes. The young trainee shifted uncomfortably, whispering again, That's not right. But once more, her voice was too soft. The man's jaw tightened. His voice was calm, but carried steel. So you judge customers by their clothes? The clerk's eyes glittered. We judge by many things. Her meaning was clear. The silence after that line stretched heavy and suffocating. The guard's boots shifted against the marble floor, closer, his arms folding tighter across his chest. The clerk turned her back again, dismissing him, as though he were already erased from the room. The man stood there, shoulders squared, eyes dark. Outwardly, he remained composed, but inside his chest, something coiled tighter and tighter. He had been here before, too many times, in different forms, with different faces, in boardrooms and restaurants and hotels that pretended to welcome everyone, while quietly deciding who didn't belong. But this was different. This wasn't just another insult to endure. This was his world, his company, his name above the door. And they had no idea. Not yet. The boutique doors chimed as a new couple entered, dressed in tailored clothes, their steps confident, their conversation light. The senior clerk's demeanor transformed instantly. Her smile widened, her tone brightened, her body language softened. She glided toward them like a gracious host, ignoring the man in the jacket as if he were nothing more than background noise. Welcome to Maison Étoile, she said warmly, offering them a tray with champagne flutes. You've chosen the perfect day. Our latest collection has just arrived. The man in jeans remained by the case, his gaze still fixed on the diamonds. He stood quietly, not moving, but his presence alone seemed to irritate her. She turned slightly, her eyes cutting toward him, and for the first time, she raised her voice so that the newcomers could hear. Some people, she said, tone mocking but casual, wander in thinking this is just another shop. They don't understand what kind of place this is. The new customers laughed politely, unsure whether to engage. The woman glanced at the man in jeans, then quickly turned back to the tray of jewelry. Her smile strained. The man's lips pressed into a line, but he didn't respond. He refused to give her the satisfaction. The clerk, emboldened by the silence, continued. We specialize in serving true clients, people who know value, who respect luxury. Not everyone fits that description. She let the words hang, sharp and deliberate. The security guard shifted again, stepping closer. His presence wasn't subtle anymore. He was looming. He tilted his head slightly, his voice dropping low but audible enough. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to either make a purchase or step aside. You're disturbing the flow of business. The man's eyes flicked toward him. Calm, controlled, but behind that calm was fire. I've disturbed no one. Your presence, the guard said flatly, is enough. The words landed heavy in the silence. The air in the boutique thickened. Even the wealthy couple stopped browsing for a moment, their laughter fading. They exchanged uneasy looks, sensing the hostility, but choosing not to intervene. The young trainee clerk's face flushed red. She opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it quickly under the sharp glance of her superior. She turned away, gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. The senior clerk leaned forward, her smile icy, her voice pitched higher so the whole boutique could hear. Sir, please understand, our merchandise is not here for everyone to handle. Some people simply don't belong in spaces like this. The final phrase dropped like a stone in a still pond. The man's chest rose and fell slowly. Outwardly, he stood tall, his posture unshaken. Inwardly, his pulse thundered in his ears, each beat reminding him of every time he'd been told he didn't belong in schools, in boardrooms, and restaurants, where he was handed the wrong check because they assumed he wasn't the one paying. But here, in this place, under a logo that ultimately bore his signature, the words cut deeper than ever before. His voice was quiet, steady, but it carried an edge. I asked to see a ring. That is all. The clerk tilted her head, feigning sympathy. And I explained, you are not the type of client we serve. A murmur rippled through the room. Some customers looked away uncomfortably, pretending to browse. Others stared openly, curiosity mixing with unease. The man didn't flinch. His gaze locked onto hers, dark and unyielding. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply stood, his silence more powerful than any outburst. But inside, the storm swelled. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. The boutique's air felt colder now, as though the crystal chandeliers above no longer radiated warmth, but cast a spotlight of judgment. The man in the plain jacket stood silently by the glass case, his calm demeanor clashing with the hostility around him. Then, unexpectedly, someone approached. It was the young trainee clerk. Her uniform was slightly oversized, her movements a little hesitant, but her eyes carried something the others lacked: humanity. She stopped a few feet from him, clutching her clipboard nervously. Um, sir? She said softly, almost in a whisper. If you'd like, I can. I can show you something. We do have other rings in your size. Her voice wasn't mocking, it was tentative, even kind. The man turned toward her, his dark eyes softening just slightly. He gave her a small nod. Thank you. But before she could move toward the case, a sharp voice cut through the air. Emma! The senior clerk appeared like a hawk swooping down, her heels striking the marble with authority. She placed herself firmly between the trainee and the man, her smile sharp as glass. What do you think you're doing? She hissed. Emma's face went pale. I was just trying to help. To help him? The senior clerk's voice rose, making sure others could hear. She gave a brittle laugh. We don't waste time on browsers, especially not the kind who clearly can't afford what we offer. The boutique's air thickened again. Customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Emma tried again, her voice trembling. But he asked, the senior clerk snapped, and I said no. Do you think you know better than your manager? Emma flinched. The man in the jacket watched, his face unreadable, but his fists clenched in his pockets. The senior clerk turned back to him, her smile returning, though her eyes glittered with cruelty. I do apologize, sir. Our trainee sometimes gets confused. She doesn't yet understand the kind of clientele we serve here. Emma's lips parted as if to protest, but she caught the warning glare and fell silent. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her hands tightening around the clipboard until it shook. The man looked from Emma to the senior clerk, then to the security guard, who still hovered nearby, arms crossed, watching as though waiting for an excuse to act. He inhaled slowly, deeply, forcing the anger down into the pit of his stomach. Outwardly, he remained calm. Respect, he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than volume. That's all anyone deserves. The senior clerk blinked, then let out another laugh, this one sharper. Respect is earned, sir. And here, it comes with a price tag. The words hung in the air like poison. Emma's eyes darted to him, full of silent apology, before she turned away under the crushing authority of her superior. The man remained still, his gaze steady, but inside him, the storm churned hotter. They thought they knew him. They thought they could define his worth with glances, with smirks, with dismissive words, but they had no idea who stood before them. Not yet. The boutique had filled with more customers, the hum of quiet conversations and the soft clinking of jewelry echoing under the chandeliers. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension vibrated like a taut string ready to snap. The man in the plain jacket remained near the display case, silent, steady, his eyes fixed on the glittering rows of rings. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a scene, and still, he had become the center of unwanted attention. The senior clerk, emboldened by the silence of others, raised her chin and let her voice carry. You know, sir, our pieces are crafted for discerning clients. Not everyone understands what that means. A ripple of laughter came from a well-dressed man standing nearby, sipping champagne offered by another clerk. His companion leaned closer, whispering something that made them both chuckle. The clerk's smile widened. She leaned toward the man in jeans, her tone mocking but laced with politeness for show. Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable at one of the street shops. They have lovely costume jewelry. Much more accessible. A flush of heat spread through the room. Customers who had been browsing stopped, pretending to study displays while sneaking glances. The security guard stepped closer still, his stance stiff and ready, as if the man in the jacket were a criminal seconds from revealing himself. The man didn't move. His silence unsettled them more than any protest might have. Then the store manager arrived. A tall man in a dark suit, his hair slicked back, his voice commanding. He scanned the room quickly, his gaze landing on the scene. What's happening here? The senior clerk gestured elegantly toward the man. This gentleman insists on handling merchandise well above his, range. I've explained our policies, but he seems not to understand. The manager's eyes narrowed as he studied the man. His lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sir, Maison Étoile prides itself on discretion. We serve clients of a certain standard. If you'd like to look at more affordable items, I suggest the front window. The words were deliberate, loud enough for the entire boutique to hear. A murmur rippled through the room. The young trainee clerk shifted nervously behind the counter, her eyes darting between the man in jeans and her superiors. She opened her mouth, but the manager silenced her with a sharp look. The man in the jacket finally spoke, his voice even but firm. I asked to see a ring. That is all. The manager chuckled, shaking his head. And I am telling you, that ring is not for you. The cruelty wasn't subtle anymore. It was public, staged, meant to humiliate. From the corner of the room, a customer quietly raised a phone, angling it discreetly toward the scene. The faint red light of recording blinked in the reflection of a display case. The man stood tall, unmoving, his expression unreadable, but inside the storm raged hotter than ever. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, some mocking, some curious, a few quietly sympathetic, but none brave enough to speak. The manager leaned closer, lowering his voice but ensuring those nearby could still hear. You people always try to push where you don't belong. Consider this your last warning. Leave. Now. The phrase you people cut through the air like a blade. The boutique fell into silence, heavy and oppressive. The man inhaled slowly, deeply, steadying himself. Outwardly, he remained calm. Inwardly, his fury pressed against the walls of restraint, threatening to break free. But not yet. Not here. Not on their terms. The boutique's atmosphere had shifted from quiet elegance to something darker, an unspoken theater of power, where every gaze fixed on one man who wasn't supposed to belong. The manager's words lingered in the air. You people, leave. Now. The man in the plain jacket stood still, shoulders squared, eyes calm but burning. His silence was unsettling, almost defiant, though he hadn't raised a hand or his voice. The security guard stepped closer, his presence now openly aggressive. Sir, the guard said, tone flat, rehearsed. This is your last chance. Exit the store. The senior clerk folded her arms, lips curving in satisfaction. She spoke loudly, as if for the audience of customers still lingering. We have standards here. Standards that must be protected. If you can't respect that, then you don't belong here. The words were cruel, deliberate. They weren't just ejecting him from a store. They were stripping him of dignity, piece by piece, in front of strangers. The young trainee clerk's face flushed red. Her lips parted, but again, she froze under the sharp glance of her manager. Her eyes, however, spoke volumes: shame, regret, helplessness. The man's voice finally came, low and steady. You speak of standards, but you've shown me none. The clerk laughed, brittle and sharp. We don't need lessons from you. Out. The guard moved closer, gesturing toward the door. Now. The man looked at the door, then back at the glittering rings under the glass. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the insult fully, the disdain, the smirks, the arrogance. He could have fought. He could have shouted. But instead, he chose silence. Slowly, he turned. The guard's heavy steps followed behind him, ensuring every move was contained. Customers shifted uncomfortably, pretending to browse, but their eyes darted toward him, watching. Some looked away in shame, others in smug satisfaction. One man at the corner kept his phone lifted discreetly, capturing every second. As the man neared the door, the senior clerk called out one last barb. Next time, sir, try somewhere more appropriate for your kind. The words hung like venom in the air. A few gasps sounded, tiny sparks of conscience from those who still had one, but no one spoke. The man paused at the door. He didn't look back at her, at the guard, or at the sneering faces. Instead, he let the silence stretch, a silence heavier than any argument he might have made. Then, he stepped through the doorway into the bright sunlight outside. The guard stopped at the threshold, arms folded, ensuring the exit was complete. The boutique doors closed with a soft click. Inside, the chatter resumed, nervous and hushed, as though nothing had happened. But the taste of the scene lingered, an unease that some tried to swallow with champagne, others with forced laughter. Outside, the man walked down the street slowly, his face calm, but his eyes distant, fixed on something far beyond the glittering shopfront. The sunlight caught in the glass behind him, reflecting the diamonds that moments ago had been guarded from him, as though they carried more worth than his humanity. Inside his chest, the storm burned hotter. Every insult replayed in his mind. Not as wounds, but as fuel. They thought they had won. They thought they had erased him, reduced him to silence. But what they didn't know was that the silence wasn't defeat. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The hotel room was silent, save for the distant hum of traffic seeping in through the windows. The city outside glowed with restless, energy neon signs flashing, headlights streaking across avenues. But inside, time seemed suspended. The man sat at the edge of the bed, still in the same plain clothes he'd worn to the boutique. His jacket hung loosely from his shoulders, his shirt slightly wrinkled. He hadn't bothered to change. The insults from earlier replayed in his mind, echoing like a cruel chorus. We don't let everyone handle merchandise at this level. This isn't for people like you. Try somewhere more appropriate. For your kind. Each phrase burned, not because he hadn't heard such words before, but because this time they had been spoken under the glow of a brand he had built. A brand that bore his name at the very top of its ownership papers. He rose slowly, crossing the room. His reflection met him in the darkened window. A tall black man, his face shadowed by the city lights behind him. He looked older in that reflection, not because of years, but because of the weight he carried. He whispered to himself almost bitterly, how many times had he been told he didn't belong? How many times had he swallowed anger, replaced it with silence, and turned the insult into ambition? He thought of the nights working 2 jobs, saving every dollar to fund his first business. He thought of the closed doors, the skeptical investors, the boardrooms where his ideas were dismissed until spoken by someone else. And he thought of the day he had finally succeeded, when the company he founded had grown, expanded, and acquired Maison Étoile, one of the most prestigious jewelry brands in the country. He had promised himself then that ownership meant power, power to shape the culture, power to protect people like him. Yet today, in his own empire, he had been treated as nothing. He turned from the window and crossed to the desk. A leather portfolio lay there, embossed with the golden crest of the holding company. His hand lingered on it. Inside were contracts, financial statements, documents that tied the entire luxury chain back to him. To the world, he was the face of progress, a black billionaire who had shattered ceilings, who owned companies that once excluded people like him. He had been celebrated in magazines, on business panels, on the covers of leadership books. But none of that had mattered when he walked into his own store dressed like an ordinary man. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was proof that the empire he had built still carried the poison of the world he thought he'd risen above. He sank back into the chair, rubbing his temples. The memory of the trainee clerk's eyes came to him. Nervous, guilty, but kind. She had wanted to help. She had seen him not as a stranger to be dismissed, but as a person. That flicker of humanity, snuffed out by her superiors, haunted him. The question pressed hard against his chest. Should he reveal himself? Should he march back into that boutique tomorrow, dressed not in jeans, but in the armor of a tailored suit, and watch their faces fall as they realized who he truly was? His heart thundered at the thought, the satisfaction, the justice of it. But another thought followed, colder. Would it change anything? Or would it just silence that boutique while the rest of the empire kept rotting beneath a polished surface? He leaned back, closing his eyes. The anger inside him pulsed like a drumbeat. He could not let it go this time. He would not. The question was no longer if he would act. It was how far he would go. Morning light cut across the city, casting long shadows on the glass towers. In the quiet of his hotel suite, the man had already made his decision. This wasn't about one boutique or one cruel clerk. It was bigger, and he needed proof. His phone lay on the desk, glowing with unanswered messages. He ignored them. Instead, he picked up another dialing a number saved under a single initial. J. The call rang once before a brisk voice answered. Yes. I need you to visit one of our stores, the man said. His tone was low, deliberate. Walk in, shop. Take note of everything. Report back to me directly. A pause. Then Jay's voice, curious but professional. You want me to pose as a customer? Yes, today. Don't say who you are. Don't mention me. Just be yourself. I need to know how they treat you. The line went silent for a second, then, understood. The man ended the call, his jaw set. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. This was no longer about his wounded pride. It was about a pattern he suspected had been growing unchecked within the walls of his empire. Hours later, Jay's report came in. They did the same thing, Jay said, his voice edged with anger. I walked in, asked about a watch, and they dismissed me. Suggested I look at more affordable options. The clerk wouldn't even open the case. Security hovered the whole time. The man's stomach sank, though he had expected it. Same words, almost word for word, like they've rehearsed it. A silence stretched between them, heavy with confirmation. This wasn't one bad apple. It was a culture. When he hung up, the man sat motionless for a long time, his hands pressed together under his chin. His empire was showing him its true face, and it was uglier than he had imagined. He pulled open his laptop, navigating through the internal portal every employee knew. Policy manuals, training modules, customer service guidelines. His eyes scanned line after line, phrases leaping out at him. Discretion with clientele. Prioritize high-value customers. Preserve brand image. What did those words mean on paper? They meant nothing but efficiency, market segmentation, revenue growth. But on the floor, in the mouths of clerks and managers, they had become coded language for exclusion, for humiliation, for quiet, polished racism. He slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the empty room. His hand lingered on the cover, his pulse racing. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't ignorance. This was the direct consequence of systems he had approved, language he had signed off on. The poison wasn't just in the store employees. It was in the documents, the policies, the philosophy that had guided the company from the top. His own philosophy. He rose, pacing the room. The reflection in the window followed him. Tall, strong, a man who had built an empire, but whose empire had betrayed him. Or perhaps, he thought grimly, he had betrayed it first. His phone buzzed again. A text from Jay. I recorded everything. Do you want the video? He typed back, keep it safe. We'll need it. Then he put the phone down and stared at the city beyond the glass. For years, he had believed he'd risen above the prejudice that once tried to hold him down. But it had seeped back in, disguised as professionalism, hidden behind corporate slogans, spreading like a stain through the very empire he thought had conquered it. And now he knew. It wasn't enough to expose one store, one manager, one clerk. He had to confront the system, tear it open, and decide whether he was strong enough to rebuild it from the ground up. The boutique's glass doors gleamed in the afternoon sun, the logo above them casting a shadow across the sidewalk. The same store, the same staff inside. But today, he wasn't walking in wearing jeans and a simple jacket. Today, he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, silk tie. Polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he entered, each step measured and commanding. The difference was immediate. Good afternoon, sir, the senior clerk said, her voice warm, her smile dazzling, her posture deferential. She moved toward him with the same energy she had shown the wealthy couple yesterday. Welcome to Maison Étoile. May I show you something from our exclusive collection? The man nodded slightly, his face calm, unreadable. The security guard who yesterday had shadowed him like a threat now shifted awkwardly, lowering his stance. His arms, once crossed in suspicion, now rested at his sides. He looked almost apologetic, though he didn't dare say a word. Other clerks glanced up from their counters, their smiles quick to appear, their tones bright as they greeted him. The air was different, charged with eagerness to please. The senior clerk gestured toward the case he had approached before. We have several pieces I believe you'll find exceptional. This platinum band timeless, elegant just came in. Her hands were careful, reverent, as she lifted the tray and placed it gently before him. Yesterday she had held it above him like bait. Today, she laid it out like an offering. The man studied the ring in silence, his eyes reflecting the same diamonds that had once been dangled out of reach. He didn't smile, didn't nod. He simply let the silence stretch until the clerk shifted nervously. Would you care to try it on, sir? She asked quickly, eager to erase yesterday's cruelty with today's courtesy. The man finally looked at her, his gaze sharp but calm. Interesting. Yesterday I was told customers like me weren't allowed to handle pieces at this level. Her face froze. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, panic flickering in her eyes. Then she recovered, forcing a laugh. Oh, sir, I'm certain you must have misunderstood. We would never— He cut her off with a small, quiet gesture of his hand. The weight of his silence was heavier than any outburst could have been. Behind him, the young trainee clerk Emma stood at her post, watching with wide eyes. She recognized him instantly. Her hands gripped her clipboard, and she looked as though she were holding her breath. The man turned his gaze back to the ring, then to the clerk. Funny how quickly policies change, depending on the clothes a man wears. The clerk stammered, I assure you, sir, that is not the case. But the words rang hollow. Every employee in the room felt the truth settle like dust. They had judged him not by his request, not by his demeanor, but by his skin and his clothes. And now, facing the same man dressed as wealth, they scrambled to cover it with smiles. The man lifted the ring, holding it delicately between his fingers. He turned it in the light, the diamond catching the chandelier's glow. His face remained unreadable. Finally, he set it back on the tray. Not today. He pushed the tray gently toward her, his tone calm, his eyes unyielding. But thank you for showing me who you really are. The clerk's throat tightened. She bowed her head slightly, words failing her. The man straightened his suit jacket, his movements precise, deliberate. He turned toward the door, but before leaving he glanced once more at the staff. His gaze lingered on the manager, who had stepped out from the back, clearly unsettled by the sight of him. "I'll be back," he said quietly. The words carried no threat, yet they made the room feel colder. Then he walked out, his polished shoes echoing across the marble, leaving the boutique in silence. Its staff rattled, its facade cracked. They didn't know when he would return, or in what role, but something in their bones told them. The next time, it wouldn't just be as a customer. The regional office of Maison Étoile was as polished as the boutiques themselves: marble floors, glass partitions, a chandelier that mimicked the sparkle of diamonds. But behind the gleam was a different kind of tension, the kind that came from people who knew they were being summoned for something they couldn't control. The man arrived in silence. No plain clothes now. He wore his authority in every stitch of his suit. Assistants scrambled, doors opened before him, and soon he stood at the head of a long conference table. Seated before him were the regional manager, several district supervisors, and the boutique manager from the day before. Their faces carried the strained politeness of people who were nervous but trying not to show it. "Sir," the regional manager began, her smile tight, "we weren't expecting you in person. If you had let us know, we would have—" "That's why I didn't," he interrupted, his voice calm but sharp. "I wanted to see the truth without a performance." The room went quiet. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "Yesterday, I walked into one of our stores. I asked to see a ring. I was denied. I was humiliated. I was told very publicly that people like me didn't belong there." Gasps rippled. The boutique manager shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. The man continued, his voice steady. "I sent someone else this morning to another store. The same thing happened. Word for word. That tells me this isn't one bad store. This is a culture." The regional manager cleared her throat nervously. "Sir, I'm sure that was a misunderstanding. Do you think I misunderstand racism?" His eyes cut into hers, dark and unwavering. "Do you think I misunderstand being shadowed like a criminal for daring to ask to see a ring? Do you think I misunderstand being told I don't belong in a brand that I own?" The last words landed heavy, shaking the air in the room. Several faces blanched. A few hadn't realized until now just who they were speaking to. The boutique manager finally spoke, his voice defensive. "With respect, sir, our staff are trained to prioritize brand image. They're instructed to focus on high-value clients." "And what defines a high-value client?" the man asked sharply. The manager faltered. "Well, appearance, discretion, purchasing history." "Appearance," the man repeated. "Say it plainly. Clothes, skin, accent. You train them to judge on sight, and then you call it protecting the brand." The silence that followed was suffocating. He straightened, his voice lower now but heavier. This company was supposed to represent excellence. But excellence is not exclusion. Excellence is not humiliation. Excellence does not mean telling a black man in plain clothes that he is not worthy to touch a diamond. The regional manager looked down, her hands folded tightly. No one spoke. The man scanned the table, his gaze cutting through each of them. "I built this empire on the belief that we could be different, that we could show the world what leadership without prejudice looked like. And instead, you have turned it into a mirror of the very systems I swore we'd rise above." The boutique manager opened his mouth as if to defend himself, but the regional manager silenced him with a glance. She could see it. This was no longer about excuses. The man let the silence linger, then spoke one final line. "Tomorrow I'll return to that boutique. And when I do, we will see who truly belongs in this company and who doesn't." He turned and left the room, the echo of his footsteps louder than the chandelier's sparkle, heavier than any words spoken that day. The leaders sat frozen in their seats, the weight of what had just been revealed pressing down on them. They had thought they were protecting a brand. Now they realized they had been dismantling it. The boutique looked the same as it had 2 days before. Diamonds glittered under velvet lights, clerks floated between displays, and the air buzzed with the hum of exclusivity. But to the man stepping through the glass doors, everything felt different. He entered not in plain clothes, not as the stranger they dismissed, but as himself, fully, unmistakably himself. His suit was tailored to perfection, his tie knotted crisp, his shoes polished until they shone. But more than that, his presence filled the room. Heads turned the moment he stepped inside. "Good afternoon, sir," the senior clerk said immediately, her smile practiced, her tone syrup-sweet. She rushed forward, bowing her head slightly. "Welcome back to Maison Étoile. We're so pleased to see you again." The man regarded her calmly, his face unreadable. Behind her, the security guard shifted uncomfortably. Yesterday, his stance had been threatening. Today, he looked like a chastened shadow of himself, unable to meet the man's gaze. Customers paused their browsing, sensing something unusual in the air. A hush began to spread. "I'd like to see that ring again," the man said evenly, gesturing toward the platinum band in the case. "Of course," the clerk said quickly. Her hands trembled just slightly as she retrieved the tray, placing it carefully before him. "It's one of our finest pieces." He studied the ring for a long moment, then lifted his eyes to hers. His voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of truth. "2 days ago, when I asked for this, you refused me. You mocked me. You told me I didn't belong here." Her face went pale. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Sir, surely you misunderstood." "I did not misunderstand," he said sharply, his tone cutting through the boutique like glass breaking. The customers froze, eyes darting between them. The boutique manager emerged from the back, his expression tight, his smile forced. "Sir, if there has been some miscommunication—" "There was no miscommunication," the man interrupted, his voice rising now, strong and steady. "There was prejudice. There was humiliation. There was racism, performed in public, under the name of this company." A silence crashed over the boutique. Even the hum of background music seemed to fade. The clerk's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The manager tried again, his voice strained. "Sir, I assure you, our policies—" The man stepped forward, his voice commanding, unshakable. "Do you know who I am?" The question froze them in place. The clerk's lips parted, the guard stiffened. The manager blinked rapidly. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. From it, he drew a card embossed with the golden crest of the parent company. He placed it on the counter, the logo unmistakable, his name printed in bold letters. The room seemed to tilt. Customers craned their necks. The clerk's hand flew to her mouth. The manager's face drained of color. "I am the owner," the man said firmly. "The name above this door, the empire you serve it, is mine. And 2 days ago, you looked me in the eye and told me I was not worthy to touch my own merchandise." Gasps rippled through the boutique. A woman clutched her husband's arm. Another customer raised a phone higher, recording openly now. The man's gaze swept the room, sharp and steady. This is what happens when judgment replaces respect, when appearance dictates worth, when humanity is stripped away under the excuse of protecting a brand. He let the words hang, their weight crushing the silence. Then he turned back to the clerk and the manager. His voice dropped, quieter but deadlier. "You thought you were guarding diamonds, but the real value of this company is its people. And today, you proved you understand neither." The clerk's eyes filled with tears. The manager stammered, "Sir, please." But the man raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough." Every eye in the room was on him now. Staff, customers, even the guard who shifted uneasily, unable to look away. He straightened his suit jacket, his voice final. "Change begins here. Now." The truth was out, the mask was gone, and the reckoning had only just begun. The boutique was frozen in silence, as though time itself had been cut open. Customers stood still. Clerks hovered nervously. The security guard shifted his weight but didn't dare move. All eyes remained fixed on the man at the center of the storm, the man who had just revealed that he owned it all. The boutique manager swallowed hard, his slick confidence gone. "Sir," he stammered, "if there has been any offense—" The man's voice thundered back, sharp and unyielding. Offense? What I witnessed here was not an offense, it was contempt. It was prejudice dressed up as policy. It was humiliation sold as customer service. He turned slowly, sweeping his gaze across the room, forcing each person to meet his eyes. 2 days ago, I walked in here dressed as myself. No labels, no armor, just a man. And what did I receive? Mockery, suspicion, rejection. All because of the color of my skin, the cut of my jacket, the shoes on my feet. A woman near the door gasped softly, clutching her handbag tighter. Another customer raised their phone higher, recording every word. The man continued, his voice steady but filled with steel. This company was built on a promise that luxury is not just about what shines under glass, but about the dignity of those who create it, sell it, and wear it. But here, in this boutique, that promise was shattered. He turned his gaze back to the manager. And the rot begins with leadership. The manager's mouth opened, but no sound came. Sweat glistened at his temples. You allowed this culture, the man said, his words slow, deliberate. You permitted your staff to judge clients not by their humanity, but by their appearance. You created an environment where cruelty was acceptable, where respect was optional. The manager's lips trembled. Sir, I can fix this. You won't, the man cut him off, because you will no longer be here. The boutique gasped as one. The clerk who had mocked him 2 days earlier went pale. The young trainee, Emma, blinked in shock, her clipboard nearly slipping from her hands. The man straightened, his voice firm. Effective immediately, you are dismissed. Security escorted him out. The guard hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing nervously between the two men. But the authority in the owner's voice was absolute. With a stiff nod, he moved to the manager's side. Sir, please. The manager tried again, his voice rising in desperation. But the guard placed a hand on his arm, steering him toward the door. His protests echoed weakly in the marble air, ignored by everyone. When the doors finally closed behind him, the boutique exhaled as though a weight had been lifted. The man turned toward the senior clerk. Her hands shook, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. You too, he said simply. Her breath caught. Please. No, he said firmly. What you did was not just a mistake. It was cruelty. And in my company, there is no place for that. Her knees wobbled as she gathered her things, leaving quickly, her footsteps sharp against the marble, until the door shut behind her. Silence filled the space again. Then, the man looked at Emma, the trainee. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. But his expression softened. You, he said gently, saw what was happening. You tried to act. And though you were silenced, you remembered what this company should stand for. Emma blinked rapidly, her lip trembling. I just thought it was wrong. And you were right, the man said. That courage matters more than any title. Her eyes welled with tears, not from fear this time, but from something like relief. The man straightened, turning his gaze to the staff still frozen at their posts. Let this be clear. Maison Étoile will no longer tolerate prejudice, not whispered, not hidden, not polished up as policy. Those days are over. From this moment forward, this company will measure its worth not in carats or profit margins, but in the dignity it gives to every person who walks through these doors. The silence was heavy, but it was different now, not poisoned, but expectant. The man looked once more at the staff, at the customers, at the glittering jewelry in its pristine cases. Luxury without humanity is worthless, he said finally. Remember that. And with that, the reckoning was set in motion. The boardroom shimmered with polished wood and steel, the long conference table stretching like a battlefield. Regional directors, executives, and senior managers sat in tense silence, their laptops open, their pens poised, but no one dared type or write. The atmosphere was too heavy for routine. At the head of the table stood the man who had built the empire, the owner whose presence alone silenced the room. He didn't need to raise his voice. His authority radiated from every word, every glance, every pause. He placed a folder on the table. Photos slid across the polished surface screenshots from the video recorded by the customer in the boutique. Faces were visible. Words were transcribed. The cruelty was undeniable. This, he said evenly, is what happens in our stores. The executives shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at the photos, others staring hard at the table, as though hoping the grain of the wood might swallow them whole. This is not an isolated incident, he continued, his tone steady but cutting. I tested another location. The same behavior, the same words, the same poison. That tells me one thing. This is systemic. The regional director cleared her throat, her voice trembling. Sir, perhaps with retraining. Retraining? He snapped, his eyes flashing. Do you think you can train out arrogance? Train out prejudice? Train out a culture that I can see is rotting from the inside out? The room fell silent again. He leaned forward, both hands on the table, his voice dropping lower. Do you know what disgusts me most? That you all sat here, quarter after quarter, sending me reports full of numbers. Profits up, costs down, efficiencies achieved. And not once did anyone ask what those efficiencies were costing the human beings who walk through our doors. An executive tried to interject. With respect, sir, our responsibility has always been to shareholders. The man's voice thundered, cutting him off. Shareholders will have nothing if the soul of this company rots to dust. I did not build Maison Étoile to be a graveyard of dignity dressed up in diamonds. His words rang against the walls, leaving silence in their wake. He straightened, letting the weight of his anger simmer down into something colder, more deliberate. This is not about one store. It is not about one manager. This is about the philosophy this company has lived by. A philosophy I created. And it is broken. The executives looked at him in shock. Few leaders admitted fault, let alone at this scale. But his eyes were clear, unwavering. I will not patch holes in a sinking ship. We are tearing it down, from the ground up. Gasps rippled through the room. One director stammered, Sir, that could destabilize. Good, the man said sharply. It needs to destabilize. Better chaos now than decay forever. He walked slowly along the length of the table, his footsteps measured, his voice softer but no less powerful. Maison Étoile will no longer measure success only in carats and profit margins. From this day forward, our first measure will be respect. For customers, for employees, for every person who steps into our orbit. Anyone who cannot accept that does not belong here. The room was silent, but it wasn't the silence of resistance. It was the silence of reckoning. Executives exchanged uneasy glances, some pale with fear, others with something like shame. The man returned to the head of the table, his voice final. I built this empire once. I will build it again. But this time, it will be worthy of its name. The chandelier above glistened, scattering light across the table. For the first time in years, the brand's brilliance seemed real again, not because of diamonds, but because of truth. Weeks later, the boutique looked the same on the outside. The same glass doors, the same gold-lettered logo, the same glittering displays. But inside, something had shifted. The air no longer carried that brittle edge of judgment. Instead, there was warmth, and ease that had never been there before. The man walked in unannounced. This time, he wore no suit of armor, no tailored jacket or silk tie. Just a simple shirt and trousers, clean but ordinary. He wanted to see not as the owner, not as a symbol, but as a customer. A clerk approached him immediately. Not the old senior clerk who was long gone. This was someone new, younger, with open eyes and an honest smile. Good afternoon, sir, she said gently. Welcome to Maison Étoile. Can I help you find something today? There was no edge in her voice, no hesitation. Just respect. The man nodded slightly. I'd like to see that ring, please. He pointed to the platinum band, the same one that had sparked everything weeks before. The clerk's smile brightened. She unlocked the case with careful hands, lifting the tray and setting it in front of him. Of course. It's one of my favorites, she said, pride in her tone. Would you like to try it on? He studied her for a moment, searching for insincerity, but found none. Slowly, he picked up the ring, turning it in the light. It sparkled the same way it always had, but it felt different now. Not because the diamond had changed, but because the space around it had. From the corner, Emma, the former trainee, stepped forward. No clipboard this time. She wore a new badge on her uniform, senior consultant. Her posture was straighter, her voice confident as she greeted another couple entering the boutique. She caught sight of him, her eyes widening slightly in recognition, and she offered a small, genuine smile. The man inclined his head in return. Other customers moved freely through the store. A young black woman with a toddler on her hip was browsing earrings. A middle-aged man in work boots looked at watches. No one received side glances. No one was shadowed by security. The transformation wasn't complete, no culture changes overnight. But the seeds had been planted, watered by accountability, rooted in something real. The man set the ring back on the tray. His voice was quiet but firm. "Thank you." The clerk nodded warmly. "My pleasure, sir. Please, take your time." He turned slowly, taking in the boutique one last time. Where once he had felt venom in the air, now there was dignity. Where once the sparkle of diamonds had mocked him, now it reflected something truer. At the door, he paused. The logo above the glass gleamed in the sunlight. The same as always, but he no longer saw it as hollow branding. Now he saw it as a promise. He whispered, almost to himself, "The true value of this house was never the gold. It was always the people." And with that, he stepped into the bright afternoon, the city alive around him, his heart steady. The storm inside had quieted not because the battle was over, but because it had begun to be won. The boutique doors closed behind him, but this time, they did not shut him out. They shut behind him as a leader who had reclaimed his company's soul.